Hi teachers, this is Rachel Gibbs with the elementary instruction team. Thanks for participating in this online professional development for small group and differentiation strategies for grades 3 through 5. So this presentation is going to be geared primarily towards differentiation in small group instructional practices in math. But I think you'll find that there are a lot of strategies and suggestions that can be relevant also for reading or for any other content area. So by all means, if you do not only teach math, you are more than welcome to continue on with the video. Also, as I go through the presentation, there are going to be a lot of links that I'm going to be referencing. So I would definitely recommend using the bit.ly address in the top corner, or you can use the QR code that is down at the bottom to access this actual slideshow so that you can go back and explore those links with articles and resources that will be referenced throughout the presentation. So just a quick overview of the 4 different sections that we're going to move through in this presentation. We're going to start with setting the stage for learning. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of the aspects of successful small group planning and differentiation that we don't always consider, but that really do make a huge impact on our ability to meet our students' needs. Thinking about strategies to determine what the actual needs of our students are. Then we'll move into small group structure strategies, and then also thinking through different options that you have for resources for all levels of learners. I wanted to start here since these are really the 8 big conceptual lenses that we want to make sure that we're thinking through with absolutely anything that we're doing with math with our students. So thinking about making sense of problems and persevering to solve them, helping our students understand that challenge is a good thing and helping them kind of work through that productive struggle, reasoning abstractly and quantitatively. So making sure we're thinking about what really makes sense and what we can do to help us see concepts that might be a little more abstract as we reason, constructing arguments, and then how to critique one another and think through our reasoning and discuss math concepts and math thinking with our peers, modeling with math, using appropriate tools and using those tools strategically, making sure that we're attending to precision and checking our work, looking for and making use of structures, making connections between different concepts that really are similar concepts or maybe the same thing in a different way, and sort of relying on what we already know, and then looking for and expressing regularity and repeated reasoning, which links right back to that, seeing those patterns and connections that exist within math. And like I mentioned before, there are links all throughout the presentation. So this one in the presentation you can click on. It's going to take you to a little bit more detailed explanation of the 8 mathematical practices. But these are included within our Alabama math standards as the overall expectations for how we want to prepare our students to think about math in a real world way, the way that they're going to need to use math when they go out into the world and seek out their actual career. So it is important that we include those, and it kind of helps us realize that a lot of times there are things that we can do with our students to help strengthen their mathematic ability that we might not always think of because they aren't framed exactly in the way that we see them maybe in a textbook or in a worksheet or in some of the online structures that we have built into our curriculum. Okay, so like I mentioned, we're going to start off with setting the stage for learning. We're going to be talking about building a risk-taking environment, setting discussion norms, practice and talking about thinking, the basics of problem solving, and building stamina and work ethic for our students. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide because there are some really great links here for you to sort of explore on your own. So when you do have time, clicking into these why and how links, it's gonna give a lot more explanation into the importance of building a risk-taking environment in your classroom. But basically, a quick summary. Just like in the beginning of the school year, we talk about the importance of setting behavior expectations, before we can move forward with true instruction in an environment where our students can really learn. Similarly, with mathematical thinking, it's really important to build that risk taking environment. A lot of times, our students are very hesitant or very nervous, maybe because of experiences they've had in the past, or just because they understand that math is something that they struggle with. They might be very nervous about sharing their thinking, and being able to have meaningful discussions about student thinking and math is really, in my opinion, the only way for you to determine where your students are really struggling and to be able to meet them where they're at and really provide opportunities for them to learn and grow. To get more information about that, like I said, go back into these links and read a little more into it. But really, we want to be building our students into Hermione here, who just can't wait to be called on to share what she's thinking, because that's how we're going to find out what our students really know. So thinking about setting discussion norms is a huge piece within that. In order for our students to feel comfortable talking about what they know, we're going to need to have some expectations as far as what those conversations look like. So it's important for our students to understand what we expect of them when they are sharing their thoughts, and also, very importantly, what we expect of them when they are listening and taking in the thoughts of others, and how they can appropriately respond to and critique the thoughts of others in a way that is respectful and thoughtful and won't hinder our students from wanting to share again. Just like with the building risk taking environment, there are also some great links here to help you think a little bit deeper into that. And a couple of other resources I included here. These are some conversation companion cards, which I love. I am going to go ahead and click into those. And these are actually intended for English language learners, but I think they're great really for any students. But they include some prompt starters and response starters just to kind of help your students think through what it looks like to appropriately share your thoughts with others, like especially when we're thinking about math and how we solve problems. I love these: negotiating, what's your claim, this is my claim, really how to appropriately disagree with someone. So that's a great tool for that. And then this is just a couple other visuals that I found and grabbed that show some examples of how to help your students understand what's appropriate and what's not when we're having discussions in the classroom. Okay, well, going right along with that, like I mentioned before, really the most important thing that you can do ever with your students in any subject that you're teaching is encouraging them to talk about their thinking. Most importantly, like I mentioned before, so that we can know what they're thinking and help figure out where misconceptions are happening. But also, we want to make sure that we're encouraging our students to notice and wonder when they're exploring mathematical concepts, to encourage them to ask questions. Teachers, of course, should be asking great questions of their students, but we also want to challenge our students to ask questions, and then to respectfully critique one another. And asking questions is a great way to do that when you don't agree with someone. Asking those people those questions, and then also asking yourself questions when you're stuck. To help you move forward, making sure that we're celebrating curiosity and creative ideas and strategies, and of course the use of mental math and justification when working through problems, making sure that we're encouraging risk taking with our students and helping them grapple and struggle through problems. This can be a really tough one for all levels of students. No one likes to struggle. For our students who struggle quite often, it gets frustrating because the struggle seems to happen over and over. And then also for our students who don't struggle as often, who seem to prevail more often when a struggle does hit, that can be really difficult to overcome. So it's important as teachers that we model the excitement for challenges. Whenever we're struggling with something, that we model that. And how actually exciting it is when you hit something that's difficult that you're having to work through. It may not feel that way right in the moment, but if you can realize that a challenge means that your brain is growing, doesn't say something bad about you, it actually means that you're becoming smarter. Also, avoiding assumptions and helping our students celebrate new perspectives. And then, of course, discussing numbers and concepts in lots of different settings and applications. One really fabulous way to help your students practice talking about their mathematical thinking is using number talks. This is especially powerful when we're thinking about building our fluency skills with numbers and operations and also moving into our place value thinking. What's really great about number talks is it creates that risk-free environment for students to simply talk about how they worked through a problem. And by doing that, it allows our students who come up with or take hold of strategies more quickly to share those with other students. And hopefully, other students are able to pick up on those strategies as well. Because a math strategy really doesn't work until a student kind of takes ownership for it. So when they're exposed to all these different ways we can think through a particular math problem, it helps them find the strategies that work well for them. I've included some information on number talk goals here and also just a very basic on how to do a number talk. However, we're very fortunate that we are going to have the actual creator and guru of number talks, Mrs. Sherry Parrish, is going to be coming to Madison City Schools in April of 2022. So we're all going to be number talk trained, so it should be something that comes very naturally to us soon. However, if you'd like to give it a go now, feel free to access our MCS number talk resources through the link here. When you click into that folder, it's located in the Math Framework Drive, but it includes a lot of examples of different number talks on different subjects and concepts within different grade levels. So it's sorted by grade level, and you can access different number talks for your grade level. It also gives you some really good guidelines on how to run a number talk and then the expectations for students to help them understand how to set discussion norms, kind of like we spoke about before when they're sharing their strategies and listening to those of others. These are just a few other examples of what a number talk might look like in introducing different skills at different levels and grades. I really like this example here that kind of shows how a purposeful string of problems can help students think about how you could use your ability to use a strategy to use one particular problem in order to help you develop an ability to solve more difficult problems. Another great way to get students thinking about different ways to solve problems and sharing their thinking process, and then for you to be able to see how they think through problems, is through the use of math journals. I think these are a great safe place for students to be able to work through their thinking. And then those are also very valuable to have when it does come time for you to meet with those students, because it gives you a conduit to talk through that mathematical thinking, because you can see how they have represented it in their own writing. And then also another example of kind of using some prompts combined with some number talk type strategies or math journaling to kind of move through the week and build upon a particular concept. So starting off with something that's interesting to our students and looking at how you could visualize that, and then thinking about how can you build off of that throughout the week. So thinking about putting it into different equations, different ways to show the number of students in our classroom, and then ultimately getting to an application piece like writing a word problem to go along with what they've worked on throughout the week. It gives you something to reference when you're working with those students in small groups. Another really important foundational piece for your students to understand are the very basics of problem solving, especially when we want to be able to have our students apply those skills that they've learned to an actual real world problem. This is a great video too that I like, that walks through what the steps of the problem solving process looks like, and gives some great strategies to help students stop and think in each different step of the process. And this YouTube channel is called Me Academy. This is a great video that comes from the channel, but they have lots of really good videos. They do a good job of, in a very simplistic way, talking through some very basic math concepts, and they also have some reading and other content area videos as well. Okay, so one thing that we hear over and over again from our teachers is that we're seeing our students lose a lot of their stamina for learning, which may kind of be a natural progression from our extended amount of time without a consistent sort of learning format, going back and forth from virtual to face, with different expectations in each setting. This is a great article that I found that lists several great strategies to help you think about how to build back that stamina for learning, thinking through that growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, not settling for what seems good enough, but always pushing for what we can do to make it the best it possibly can be, and helping them understand that it's normal to struggle. Another great strategy for helping to keep your students super engaged and always excited about what they're learning is finding ways to incorporate technology into what you're doing. And of course, we don't want to just replace what we could do just as well in a traditional setting with technology, but there are lots of ways that we can use technology to help our students take what they're doing to the next level. Or we can use some of those ed tech tools that we already have, like iReady, which we'll talk about later, to help our students build upon a path that's appropriate for them. Or also, there are all kinds of creative product tools out there for our students who are picking up things very quickly to help them move on to maybe something a little more challenging, or take what they already know and apply it in a way that's a little bit bigger to show what they've learned in maybe a larger scale project. Okay, now that we talked a little bit about setting the stage for powerful learning, we're going to talk about some of those strategies that we can use to determine student need. And we're really going to be focusing in on using preassessment. So we'll talk about what preassessing looks like, and then I'm going to talk through three tools that you can use within the math classroom to help you with preassessing your students' needs. So we're going to look at big ideas, extra math, and iReady. So basically what it means to preassess your students, and a lot of you probably already know this, but preassessment basically means assessing your students before you've taught them anything, which is extremely powerful because it helps you know what they already know and don't really need your help with learning. Another really important piece of preassessment, however, though, is making sure that you're transparent with your students and that they understand what preassessment is as well. For different students, it can be very, very stressful when they're given something that they know looks like a test and they know that they don't know how to find the answer. So it's really, really crucial that if you are using preassessment as a strategy, and it's a wonderful strategy for differentiation, that you are helping your students to really understand that the point of this is for me to know what you already know. And it is very normal and, in fact, expected that you do not know all of this because I have not taught it to you yet. So making sure that you set the stage for that first. And then I kind of broke down just sort of what the levels of proficiency might look like for you when you're scoring a preassessment and deciding where you want to go with your instruction from there. So for example, let's say that I decided to give the practice test A in multiplication strategies for the next big ideas chapter that I'm about to be covering. So if we're seeing students scoring around 60% and below, they most likely aren't at the level of proficiency that I'm hoping to see in that topic area. And those students might even need to have some prerequisite skills built in, possibly, or it could be that in that whole group setting, they're going to catch on when you first introduce the skill. But possible that they might even need to go back to some prerequisites, some individual or small group instruction with you, and possibly even some more hands-on or modeling of the visualizing the concepts that you're teaching. And number talks are going to be powerful for any level. And then looking at that second level of proficiency, around scoring around 60 to 80% on a preassessment. Most oftentimes, those are going to be your students who are just about right on grade level where you would expect them to be. They're probably going to pick up on those skills fairly quickly when you introduce it with just some small group and targeted practice that's engaging. And then also possibly looking at some of that modeling and visualizing. And like I said, of course, number talks and engaging meaningful practice. And then with your high level of proficiency, I put 80% or above. Some might think more like a 90% or above. Those are probably your students who may not really even need that on grade level instruction for that particular skill. If there's a particular area within the assessment that you saw they showed a lack of understanding in, you might even be able to catch them up really quickly in a one-on-one or small group setting on that one particular little area of the chapter, and then move them on to things that are more challenging. Challenging practice with math games or projects, application or performance task, or maybe even an open-ended project-based type option. I'm going to be talking about some of those later, or introducing them to higher level skills. And that can be sometimes difficult for classroom teachers since you are expected to teach your grade level. So sometimes it can be hard to know the best way to introduce them to a higher level skill. One great thing for us is that with our iReady progress monitoring tool, we're able to set those instructional pathways for students. So that's one great opportunity you can give for those students that's going to be offering them practice at the higher level if that's where they are. Okay, so we're going to look at the 3 pre-assessment resources that we have available to you through Madison City. And there are tons of different ways for you to pre-assess. These are definitely not the only resources that you can use. But within Big Ideas, you have the option to use overall pre-assessments or benchmarks. And by that, I mean there is a pre-course test for every grade level, which covers all of the skills that are going to be covered throughout the year. So that's a good thing to be able to see. Big Ideas also has built-in benchmarks for each grading period that you can use if you would like to pre-assess that way. One thing I really like about Big Ideas pre-assessments and benchmarks versus the actual chapter practice tests is that they are pretty much entirely procedural. So they give you a really clear picture of what the students can do skill-wise. Now, that being said, it's not showing you the application piece of that. You're going to see that more in the chapter tests within Big Ideas. So I think it's helpful to know what skills your students already have. So I do like that about those assessments, but it is important to keep in mind that application piece is also very important. Big Ideas also offers a practice test, or I'm calling it test form A, for each chapter within the curriculum. And you might be using Form A as your actual test at the end of the chapter, and that's fine. Form A and Form B are actually the exact same test. The problems are just presented differently. So it doesn't really matter which one you use for which piece. There's also a Form A and a Form B online, and those tests include the exact same types of items that are on the actual tests that are included within your curriculum. Again, the items are just worded differently. You also have a prerequisite check that's available to you within the chapter resources for every chapter. I think that's really powerful. It can be used as a pre-assessment, but also might be a instructional tool for you with your students who you are picking up on pretty quickly, are not ready for what you're about to introduce, to help you check if they even have that prerequisite that's needed for the skill that's about to be introduced, and that can help you know how far back you might need to back up in your small group instruction. You can also develop your own pre-assessments through Big Ideas using the assessment tool. You can also give these virtually. Some teachers may feel your students aren't quite ready for that, and that's completely understandable. And in some cases, you might feel it's better for the students to have paper and pencil to be able to work everything completely out on their own paper and not have to transfer those answers to the online tool, and that makes sense. One thing I do really love about the online pre-assessment option is that it's going to give you the results immediately because you can set it to score for you. So it's going to help you see really quickly where your entire class is for the chapter that you're about to be going into. It also gives really quick feedback to your students. You can set the assessment also to allow your students to be able to see their results. And so as soon as they finish, they can open up and see which questions they missed. And so they can click into those and see why they missed a particular question. So it helps them also take ownership for what they are going to need to build as you introduce the skill. Using iReady pathways is another great way to pre-assess. iReady um, gives you a lot of information about your students. It helps you see what grade level they are currently working at. And then within that, it also helps you to see which mathematical domains they're struggling in. And then diving deeper down into that, it helps you see which particular skills they're struggling with. And then it also suggests for you different lessons or tools within that teacher toolbox that you might use to pinpoint and help students who are struggling in particular areas. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about extra math because there is a whole separate professional development that's looking at fluency practices. But extra math is also a powerful pre-assessment tool when you are looking at those reports that it generates for your students. And this is a great tool that I found here that you can use to help you decipher extra math reports. It goes through what all of those different symbols mean when you're looking at those scoring reports in extra math. And I think the most powerful piece for planning small group instruction is probably this piece, the Mastery Matrix, which uses that color-coded system to help you see which particular facts your students have mastered. And then those that are colored yellow, you know that your students are answering them correctly, but taking longer than what's considered to be an efficient amount of time. So they may need to develop strategies in those particular fact family groupings. And then also the gray helps you to see that those are problems that students are not yet reliably answering. So very possible that might possibly not have strategies at all for those particular math facts. So that's something that you can hone in on when you're having those purposeful discussions in one-on-one or small group settings. So when you're thinking about and evaluating those pre-assessments, what is the actual goal? So it's definitely going to give you really good information about what your students already know and what they need to learn. And then from there, it helps you to prepare those targeted small group conversations and to provide appropriate practice or challenge for them. Um, in my opinion, it would be really powerful to take the actual practice test that those students completed in their pre-assessment and sit down and look at that with your students when you're meeting with them in small group. Have them talk through with you how they thought through a particular problem, which if you're putting into place those practices of constantly having those mathematical discussions and practicing what it looks like to talk about math, and that's going to be a much easier thing for you to do. And then as you're hearing them talk through how they solved the problem, it's going to help you understand what strategies they have, where they got stuck, where the misunderstanding is happening, and help you to be able to help them think through the problem in a more efficient way. And then for your students who are more on level and just need more opportunity to practice in an engaging way, or for your students who need an additional challenge, it's going to help you know what kinds of resources you want to provide for those levels of students. So when the students are actually at your small group table, what happens then? We kind of just talked about that a little on the last slide. And you're going to hear me say it over and over again, but really talking about thinking the main priority in conversations that are guided by that pre-assessment data, like I said, or maybe even looking at the pre-assessment itself when you're talking through. And there are some prompts listed here to help you think through what kind of discussion prompts you might start off with, or what kinds of questions you might ask your students to help get them thinking about and talking to you about how they worked through a problem. And then making sure that you're really listening intentionally for interferences with thinking, or for a lack of strategies that might need to be built, or for just basic procedural needs. It may be that you need to back up because you're trying to work with a student with multiplication strategy, and that student hasn't mastered addition and subtraction yet. So we might need to back all the way up to a prerequisite skill and build that before we're really ready to dive deep into the skill that's coming up. Or for our little ones, it might be that we're still grappling with that transition between abstract and concrete numbers, and we're not sure that the figure five means five, so we're having to practice that prerequisite skill before we're ready to think about what 5 plus 2 looks like. And taking anecdotal notes constantly as you're having that discussion, so that you can constantly go back and reference what you saw in your discussion, so that as you go through the school year, you can kind of see how the progress is building as you continue to work with those students. And it's really important, I think, to always make sure that you are reflecting with your students at the end of a small group session or a one-on-one session, and focusing in on those achievements. Even if they still are struggling with that prerequisite skill that you're trying to build, but you noticed that they got frustrated less today, that is an accomplishment. They're learning to celebrate challenge rather than get frustrated. Focus in on that, and then setting goals together for the next session, and trying to really think about setting a goal for the next session that's a small step that's attainable. I like this example from iReady, and it's focused in on iReady instructional goals, but I think you could take something like this and adjust it for your own classroom needs as well. So I love it for thinking about your students' data and reflecting. Also, this piece over here, just for when we're having conversations with our students: what did you learn? What are you proud of? What do you need to improve on? And then while working on iReady lessons, or if you're using something like this just within your general classroom instruction, while I'm practicing this skill, I will. And then setting goals together and the action that will need to be taken to actually meet those goals. I think that's a very powerful piece, because it gives both the teacher and the student ownership as you move forward and work towards reaching those goals. Okay, the next piece of our presentation is looking at small group structure strategies. So, I mean, you can have the very best small group instruction planned, but if you don't have a good structure in place to make sure that it's going to work well and that it's really what your students need, it can be difficult to be able to deliver that instruction in a meaningful way. So, thinking about how will it look today? And like I mentioned before, there are lots of great links included within the slideshow, and especially in the next few sections. So be sure to come back and click through and really explore some of those. But I wanted to start off with this big question. This is something that we've talked a lot about with our math teachers this year. So really thinking creatively about, what does my instruction need to look like today so that I can make small groups work the way that they need to. I think we're finding more and more that our gap between our students who really need us to back up, because there are some major prerequisites that we need to go back and build with them, and our students who need an additional challenge, it's really growing. And because of that, I think we might need to start thinking a little more creatively about what our math instruction time looks like. And do we need to be spending less time in that whole group setting and more time in our small groups, where students can really be working at their level and where you can devote time to your students more often and their individual needs? So this is a rotation setup for a small group strategy that was shared with me by one of our teachers at Heritage Elementary. So a big thanks to Miss Dean and the fourth grade team there. Um, but I thought it made a lot of sense, and so wanted to share it with everyone else. And basically, it's just a very basic, math rotation, like we would see happening in just about any math classroom with our small groups. But what I think makes it really powerful is two different things. For one, they made the decision that for now, while they're seeing these big gaps with their students, one day of their math instruction is devoted to small groups. They do small groups for the entire day. And they also make that day Monday, and they focus the content of what's happening within each rotation, with the exception of the iReady Math rotation and the Meet the Teacher rotation. They make the content very review focused. And I think that's really powerful for a couple of reasons. For one, it's going to give you that prerequisite check that your students grasp what you covered in the previous week's instruction before you move on to introducing new skills. But secondly, it's also going to guarantee for you that there are going to be less of those students coming to you with questions because they're not sure what to do, and less of those students who are over at a station just kind of staring at a piece of paper or scribbling or writing down something or trying to work through something that they have absolutely no idea how to work through because it was just introduced to them that day. So I think it's a really great idea. So it also allows, when those students do get to that station where they're meeting with the teacher, for you to have that opportunity to take that pre-assessment data to help work with those students who are going to need to build prerequisite skills moving into the next chapter, or for you to have the time to investigate and kind of complete your own individual pre-assessment with those students to figure out where they are. It's going to help you to, in that time, be able to start to prepare those students who are going to need a little extra attention as you move into the new instruction. It's also going to help you to know and provide engaging practice for your students who are going to be on pace. And then another huge plus, it's going to help you to know who your students are who have already grasped this, and to go ahead and start offering them some additional challenge. Of course, there are lots of different options for how you set up your small groups. You can do stations or rotations, like we just spoke about. You might be planning to do student choice activities, and I will show some different resources you can use for setting those up in a moment. Another way you can work small groups, and I really love this idea, is having all students working on sort of more of an open-ended activity or project. And by that, I mean an activity where they are taking the skills that they're learning and applying them in more of a kind of realistic application fashion, um, in order to solve a problem or in order to come up with something creatively on their own. And I'll show you an example of a resource that's great for that too here in a minute. But that opens up the opportunity to do small group conferencing. So you might have several groups that you've separated in whatever fashion you determine makes sense, that are working through a project that's applying their skills. But then you can call those small groups to you for that small group conferencing and work with them individually in that way. Um, Another option is to have different or leveled activities for the different groups, and that can be a little bit more challenging, but not completely impossible to do. This is a great link to help you think through the different ways that you might determine your student groups and organize them rather than just grouping students based on their ability. There's lots of different creative ways to think about doing that, and maybe mixing it up from one small group session to another in the way that you're grouping your students. Um, and then also within iReady, you have the ability to set up instructional groups, and that is going to help you figure out more how to group your students according to those who have similar needs. I also have linked here, up here with the 5 proven secrets every teacher needs to know for effective math stations. This is a link to a website that I really love. So when you click into it, it's going to take you to the Rowdy math teacher site, and I have her referenced a lot throughout the rest of the presentation. She has some really great resources listed on her site. Some of the things that she offers are paid through Teacher Pay Teacher, but she also has a lot of free resources that she puts out that are very helpful. So I would suggest that you kind of peruse her site for some of the some things that she offers that you might be able to take and apply to your own small group instruction. And then here there are some strategies for you to think through, making sure that your small group runs efficiently. We've kind of talked through some of them before, but this is a great article that you can look at with different ideas. I have that iReady instructional goal listed here again, making sure that you're setting really clear goals for your small group activities so your students understand their expectations, and then within that, a posted small group expectations, including things like what should you do when you're finished. And then beyond that, helping your students to always kind of have that built in response to asking themselves, are they really finished? And what can I do to make this even better? And some of that has to do with the types of activities that they're being given. I mean, if they're working on a worksheet, and they're finished with it, there's not a whole lot that they can do to make it a lot better. But if they're working on more of a activity or an application piece or a project, then there's usually a lot of opportunity to improve that and make it even better. Helping your students think about who they can ask if they're not sure what to do before they come and ask you, so that you are able to make good use of the time with your students that you're working with. And then when it is appropriate, for them to know that they have kind of tried all their other means to figure out the solution themselves, and that it is an appropriate time to come to you as the teacher and ask, so that they're not wasting the time that they have in their small group. Okay, so now we're at our last section, thinking through different resources that are available to you for all different levels when you are providing those small group resources. So we're going to look at different station resources and open-ended activities. I'm going to go into some of the resources available through Big Ideas at every level. Some of the iReady resources that you have available for you, like the Teacher Toolbox, um, and also resources for students who may have compacted out and need something a little more challenging. And these math projects and challenge libraries can also actually be adapted for any level of students. So just a good option for open-ended activities for your students. Okay, so on this slide, with station resources and open-ended activities, over here, just a few different ideas of ways that you might offer resources or open-ended activities, and there are tons of links over here for you to click through of different resources you might like to try and use. And I'm not going to click and open every single one for the sake of time. But there are some student choice boards linked here, and tic-tac-toe boards, differentiation menus. These math station activities and the math journaling over here come from that Rowdy math teacher site that I talked about before. Another thing that I do want to click in and just kind of show you, so you get an idea of sort of how to navigate it, are the math Hyperdocs that are linked here. Now that we have one-to-one technology, we can do all kinds of awesome things with our students on their devices. And Hyperdocs is one cool thing that I know a lot of us probably haven't explored, but I think you would find quite powerful if you did take the time to explore it. This is one good website, and there are tons of Hyperdoc websites out there. This one has really just kind of a plethora for you to search through, but there is one whole math Hyperdoc section. So let's go down and we'll just click into one. Let's do first grade. And then this particular one is letting you kind of choose a Hyperdoc within the Hyperdoc. How about let's do near doubles? And generally, they're set up on a Google slide or a Google Doc, and it will ask you to make a copy. Um, in the simplest terms, a Hyperdoc is pretty much like a virtual worksheet. But the way it's set up, it's much more engaging because you can include videos. Students get to work through things online. You can include um, online games for them to use to practice what they're learning. And then a lot of times some fun creative ways to show what they learned. So if you do decide you want to try a Hyperdoc out, in my opinion, the best way to share it is either as an assignment on your Google Classroom or on Schoology. Here's an example of this near doubles Hyperdoc. So it starts off with Explore. It looks like there are several videos for the students to watch. Explain. This one has Seesaw and Flipgrid linked. So the intention here, it looks like, is for you to be able to use one of those platforms to post a question and let your students explain what they have learned so far so they can all kind of share with one another. Then apply. Looks like there's a couple of games here for them to play to apply their learning. And then also at the end, there's a create section where they can choose from several different options to show their mastery and share with their classmates. I know for some of our students, it's all about the level of readiness to be able to do something like that. And sometimes those types of tech activities might seem a little bit daunting. But when you do feel ready, I encourage you to try out some of those things because it's really amazing the amount of engagement that adding technology adds into your students' learning, in addition to a ton of other benefits. Another thing that's linked here, and you'll see this again later, are projects by standards. So Madison City Schools has purchased K through 2 and 3 through 5 math projects through K5 Math Resources. And these are really great. They are aligned to our standards. So as you go through, you can see which standard the project goes with. And each one is a very clearly laid out project that will allow the student to apply the skills that they've learned to a very real world sort of setting. Another idea when you're doing small groups and stations is incorporating self-checking activities. These are just a couple that I linked that I've seen success with in the past. Versatiles allow students to complete the problem and then flip the tiles over to check if they answered the questions correctly. And then math mosaics are provided with different skills, and students can work through the problems, and then there are different ways of checking if you answered the questions correctly by the visual or picture that you create through your answers. And those two resources are paid resources, so you would need to use your state funds if you're interested in purchasing something like that. However, quite often our gifted teachers in the school keep a differentiated resource library within their classroom, where they keep resources like these and may even have these exact resources, as well as lots of others that they can check out to you. While our gifted teachers are geared towards assisting you with challenging your students who are high achieving, some of the resources that they check out are also very appropriate for students at all levels. So if you're interested in trying some of those, I encourage you to touch base with the gifted specialists at your school. Okay, within Big Ideas, there are also several different resources that you can use to help you provide instruction for your students at different levels of need. So I kind of have them organized in that way. So I'm going to go through and show you where you can find these different resources in just a second, Big Ideas. But just so you know what I'm going to be what we're going to be looking at to help with those students who are kind of our strugglers and are going to need to sort of build those prerequisites or reteach. Those are provided in your resources by chapter. There are also resources for all three levels of our students included in the differentiating the lesson resource and within the skills trainer for our students that are kind of on target. You might find it helpful to use some of the extra practice or enrichment and extension resources with those, as well as the game library or online activity library. And then also for your high level students, you might find it beneficial to use the enrichment and extension resources, as well as the game library or the online activity library. So I'll show you where you can find those within Big Ideas. Okay, so now I am in the Big Ideas dashboard, and I'm going to go through and show you how to navigate to some of the different resources that have been covered in the presentation, if you would like to try utilizing some of those. If you're not sure how to get to the dashboard, you can access it through your Clever account. It should appear as an icon. If you don't see that when you access your Clever account, then you need to turn that in as a help desk ticket. Okay. So once you are within the dashboard, it should look just like this for you. But if you are having that issue where you're having a box pop up for you that says you don't have a book assigned to your classes, then that's easy to fix. You can go into the class management here, or you can also access it through the menu option up here. When you click into class management, it looks a little different for me because I don't have any actual classes, but you guys will see a list of your classes here. You'll be able to select your class, and then once you have your math class selected, or multiple math classes if you teach multiple, then you'll see an option up around this area to click the book for that class and assign the correct grade level for them. If you have any issues doing that, also just reach out to me. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the dashboard, and those of you who have explored this dashboard probably realize that there is a lot on here, and a lot of the things I'm going to be talked about can be accessed in several different ways. I'm just going to show you one way to get to all of them, but there are probably tons of different ways to access the different resources I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close the webcam so you can see a little better. So first off, looking at how to set up a pre-assessment, if you would like to offer an online pre-assessment, and then I'll also show you how you can access those assessments to give in paper pencil fashion as well. But if you would like to do it virtually, when you're over here in this section, you can click into the activity library, and that is going to allow you to share a assessment that was built entirely by Big Ideas. We'll talk a little bit later about if you're wanting to create something of your own. But going into the activity library looks like this. When you go in, you're going to see kind of just probably what looks like a bunch of random stuff over here, but you can use the filter section over here to get to exactly what you're looking for. Okay, so if I click through, probably not a really big deal who you choose as owner, but since we are wanting to offer a Big Ideas assessment, I'm going to click Big Ideas. Type, I'm looking for assessment, and you can use the minimize button to close those back up as you go through. We're in the correct program already, Alabama 2022. I'm in the correct book. I'm just going to work within third grade for this video. And let's say that it's the beginning of the school year. So I'm going to choose chapter 1, multiplication and division. Now, since I'm looking at chapter 1, I actually have two options that I could use for pre-assessment here, depending on what I'm wanting to assess. I have a pre-course test. This test is going to look at all of the skills that we're going to be introducing to students throughout the third grade year. So if you want like a big overall picture of what your students already know as far as their third grade standards, that's a great way to go. Or you have a practice test here, and that is going to be pretty much a copy of the chapter test that they would be taking at the end of chapter 1, just set up with different item wording. So it kind of depends on what you're looking for. Are you wanting to find out what your students know for the entire school year, or are you wanting to just see what they already know within that first chapter that focuses on multiplication and division? So let's say for now, I'm just wanting to pre-assess chapter 1. So once you click that, very easy to assign. You're going to click assign here. And then you have all your options that you can set up here when you're assigning that practice test. You can, especially for our little ones, this might be helpful to let them know when they click into their big ideas, they need to click on the rubber ducky and take that test so that they kind of have something to look for. Date and time, if you want to have a start date and start time when they can actually access the test, I think that makes a lot of sense if you don't want them taking it ahead of time. And you might want to be careful about the due date thing, because if you do set up a due date and you have students out, it might make it a little more difficult to get to allow them to go back in and take the test. You'll have to go back in and kind of reset things. So you might want to just leave that blank. Down here you have your submission options. You can choose to release for review on submission, or you can change it to release for review by teacher. That's up to you, whatever you would prefer with that. I think it's really powerful to leave it so that your students can review upon submission. That makes it so that as soon as they finish that pre-assessment, it will allow them to go straight to their results and see what they answered correctly and what they missed, which I think is really valuable information. Now, if you were using this for an actual chapter test, you may want to hold off and release it for review by teacher after you've had an opportunity to look over their results and maybe even plan to conference or meet with them to discuss that together. And we also have to permit, you can permit late submissions. So if you did set a due date, if you have this clicked, those students can still submit. It will just show up as having been submitted late. And then different tools you can allow for the students to have. And if you want the questions to be randomized, or if you want the answer options to be scrambled. You can also add a message that will appear for your students before beginning the test if you would like to. And then you're going to be able to just click assign, and that will assign to your class to take whenever you have the start date set up. You can also see the prerequisite skill practice is here as well that we spoke about if you do want to just find out if they have the prerequisites mastered before starting a new chapter. Once you're ready to take a look at your students' results, your assignments are going to show up here. You'll be able to click into those assignments and then go into a detailed report for your class as a whole, or you can dive individually into each individual student. Okay, so that's how you access the online version of those assignments. If you would prefer to create an assignment for yourself, you can also do that. You would just do create new assessment. You can use the filter similarly to what I just showed if you want to pull up the pre-course test, or maybe make some kind of combination of the pre-course and chapter test. You can select particular items that you would like to add to your pre-assessment. And once you have it set up the way you want it, you have the option here to title it, which I would encourage that you do. And then another huge thing, whenever you are creating and putting out anything from the Big Ideas dashboard, it is very important that you tag it. This is the way that they kind of place activities that you're creating with particular chapters. So if you don't tag it, it's just going to go somewhere random amongst the thousands of activities they have out for you to choose from. So it's going to be really hard to navigate back to it. So make sure you click into tags and then go in and assign it to the correct book. And then I would connect it to the chapter that makes sense. Since this one is a pre-assessment at the beginning of the school year, I'm going to connect it to chapter 1 and then save. So since I did that, now when I go back in to access, since it's the most recent that I've made, it is showing up right here. But by the time I'm looking for this next school year, that won't be the case. But when I click into chapter 1 now, it's going to be associated with chapter 1, so it will always pop up there for you. You can also access a paper pencil version of the pre-assessment options. I think going into resources is probably the quickest way to access, but they're also down here at the bottom. When you click into any chapter, you can go into the assessment book, and that's gonna offer you the test A and test B for any chapter. So you can get to that there. But resources is going to allow you to really get to any of those assessments that you're wanting to use. So when you select resources, I'm in grade 3. I'm going to go into chapter 1. And when I click the assessment book for chapter 1, it's going to show me here a PDF or a Word version of that Chapter 1 assessment, both the Test A, which could be used as the pre-assess, and the Test B, that could be used for summative. And I didn't even realize until recently when a teacher told me about it that there is a Word version also. So that's pretty nice if there are little small things that you want to change, or if you want to add in some kind of visual or a box or something to help your students understand what's expected of them in certain pieces of the assessment. You can customize that yourself in the Word version. To get to those overall pre-assessments and benchmark tests, I would go into all chapters, and then from there I would browse by resource. Once you click Browse by Resource and then open up Assessment Resources, you have this option here to select Book Resources, and that is going to allow you to access that pre-course test, which I was looking at earlier, the prerequisite skills, or also a benchmark 1, 2, and 3 that could be used at the beginning of first, second, or third 9 weeks to kind of pre-assess what they already know for those particular time frames. And again, they're also offered in PDF or Word form. As far as the resources within the chapter that are available for you to use when you are meeting with students in your small groups, those can also be accessed either through the resources option here or down at the bottom. I think some of those are a little easier to access down at the bottom, but either way is fine. So let's say again, I'm in chapter 1. If you go into resources by chapter, that's where you're going to find a lot of those suggestions that were made for offering some additional support or opportunities for your students at different levels. There's kind of an overall of everything that's going to be available within the chapter resources. There's a daily skills practice and vocab practice. We talked about the prerequisite skills practice. That's here in the chapter resources. There's also some extra practice if you think that's going to be beneficial for your students who are kind of on target. But keep in mind too that we want to make sure we're offering some engaging practice activities for those students and not just worksheets. I like this reteach opportunity that is provided within each lesson for students who are going to need to possibly work with you to kind of reteach and rebuild some of those foundational skills that go into what was covered in the lesson. The enrichment and extension activities are also an option for your students who are on target or who need a bit of an additional challenge. I also mentioned the differentiating the lesson activities that are included. There are some good ones within this resource. So when you click on that differentiated lessons, it's going to give you an overview of the different differentiated lessons that they offer within each lesson within that chapter. They're kind of different from lesson to lesson. So you'll have to kind of read to find out who the target is. And the very first sentence tells you that this lesson is designed for advanced learners. This lesson is designed for all levels of learners. provide support for students to perform repeated addition with efficiency, support for students who would benefit from more examples. In here, designed for students who may struggle determining the size needed to make equal groups. So it's a good thing to glance into as you're working through the lesson and see if there is a resource here that fits your need for your particular student. I also referenced the skills trainer and the game library. Those can be accessed up here by clicking on that menu, the 3 lines we talked about before. When you click into the skills trainer, the one thing with the skills trainer, at least as far as I have discovered so far, one of you guys out there may discover that you can assign this more specifically, and if you do, please let me know. But from what I can tell, with the skills trainer, you would need to kind of help navigate your students to the particular skill that you are wanting them to work within, or give them specific directions that I want you to start off in addition, identifying a property, so that they know where to start. But when they do click into the skills trainer, it's going to just pull up practice for them to work through, and it does give the option to read the question aloud to them.
Identify the property. 7 plus 12 is equal to 12 plus 7.
Okay. What I also do like about the skills trainer is that it lets them check their work, or if they're really struggling with figuring something out, they can stop and they can choose to watch a video tutorial to help them work through the problem. So I think that's a pretty powerful tool to have built in there. We also talked about the game library. It can be accessed for students to play online here. Again, you would need to let them know which game you're expecting them to work on, but there are lots to choose from, and your curriculum will kind of let you know which game goes with which particular chapters. You can also choose to have them work on the game interactively, or if you would like to be able to print the game for your students to use, you can click that PDF option, and they provide English or Spanish versions of the game for students to work through paper pencil. Of course, you can also set up activities like we referenced before, using the online activity library or creating your own, just like we talked about with assessments, just remembering to add that tag so you will make sure that it's placed in the correct location. I'm inside iReady now. I also wanted to show a few of those resources that I mentioned previously, just so you can kind of see how it looks to navigate to some of those inside the iReady platform. So right now I have an example diagnostic report pulled up for math for a second grade student. One interesting thing that iReady includes for you in a student report is a look at typical growth versus stretch growth. So that kind of helps you to see how much of a gain your student would need to make in order to make the typical amount of growth that a student at their grade level placement would make. But then also with stretch growth, if you're able to achieve that for the student, then that's going to get them to a place where they can actually potentially catch up and become proficient. So it kind of helps you see what that path would look like. Also, obviously, you can see in the report what grade level placement the student is falling at within particular domains. And then the little blue arrows that you see next to that grade level placement is going to take you to some suggested resources and some differentiated lessons that you might try with that particular student for their level of readiness. All of those resources that are offered for each particular student can also be found here by navigating to the teacher toolbox. Something else that we talked about was the ability to use iReady's instructional groupings to form your small groups if you would like, so you can see how to do that here. And then one last thing that I will show are the games that are available within iReady, and you can navigate to those here. Okay, and our final group that we're going to talk about are those students that really need an additional challenge. And I think sometimes we tend to overlook this group of students. It's very natural to want to focus on our strugglers who really, really need our help. And those students do need your help, but it's important that we are providing for all of our students and what they need. And in Madison City, especially, we tend to have a lot of these students who are very high achieving and need an additional challenge. And it's actually very apparent in our data when you break it down that we see the least amount of growth, unfortunately, with our students who are our highest achievers. So the number one best strategy to use with those students is compacting. And if you do begin that practice of pre-assessing with your students, that's going to be the first big step to help you be able to do that. Once you kind of set that cutoff, and sometimes that needs to be determined between you and parents what they feel comfortable with, whether 80% is good enough, or 80% and then catching up on something small that we need to master and moving up to 90%, or if you want to set that compacting cutoff for 90% and above, for your students who don't need to participate in the basic whole group direct instruction. Um, and then those students can move on to a different, more challenging project, either working on higher level skills, or working within a project or application that is taking what they already know and applying it in a more broad and more deep way so that they understand how those skills are actually used in a real world way. This link will take you to some compacting resources that can help you just kind of go through the process of documenting that you are compacting a student and how you're going to still meet those students' needs. That's a good thing to have if they're going to be doing something totally different than everyone else in the classroom, and to help you keep those students accountable for what they're doing. I linked those math projects here again that we talked about earlier. I think that's a great option for your students who are going to be compacting out to take those skills and apply them in meaningful ways. This is another resource for you. It's a website that I found that I really liked. It's set up in a very simplistic way, but basically it's just giving you ideas for creative ways that students can show their learning. So allowing your students to then take those skills that they have already mastered and present that to you in a way that's a little more creative, and letting them incorporate some other skills that are going to be beneficial to them moving forward, maybe some tech skills, some of those big 4Cs like incorporating communication, creativity, collaboration, and critical thinking. Lots of these different creative options are online virtual options, but some of them are not. So just some ideas for you, or maybe you might even let your students peruse and choose how they'd like to show, demonstrate their learning to you sometimes. And I mentioned thinking about moving students up into higher level skills, or even using that in combination with some of these larger scale projects with your students. And that can be difficult, like I said before, for you to do as a classroom teacher who has to also prepare curriculum on your grade level. So also lean on some of those other programs that we have that can help you with that, like iReady, or Prodigy or Khan Academy. We definitely don't want a student who is high achieving and showing mastery in the upcoming skill just sitting on iReady all week. That's not beneficial to the student, and it's isolating. But using that maybe for a portion of the week in combination with some of these other resources is definitely appropriate and meaningful for that student. One other thing that is linked here, that I've created, is the Digital Challenge Classroom. So when you click into that, it is going to take you here. So if you share this link with your students, they can access it just like this. They can click into their grade level, and then they're going to be taken to a page with several different options for them to choose from. Now, some of these options are very math related. Well, I should rephrase. All of these options are very math related. Some of them are very related to your standards that you're used to teaching. And some of these options are more focused within critical thinking and problem solving, reasoning ability in themselves. However, those skills are crucial foundational skills to any standard that you would be teaching within the math classroom. So you can give this to your students to choose from just as is and let them choose their own challenge. Also, I included an option down here for you to force your own editable copy. So if you like this, but you want to change it up and make it a little more specific to what you want your students to choose from that week, or if you just like the format of it and you want to use it to present something completely different, you're welcome to force your own copy and edit it however you would like. The last very important piece in small group instruction and differentiation is making sure that you're always including that last piece of reflecting on what you learned. So, making sure that your students always have that piece at the end of their small group where they're sharing new learning or sharing challenges that they face that they know they want to work on moving forward. And there's lots of ways to do that. A lot of them we've already talked about. You might use exit tickets. It might be part of their journaling or online blogging. It might just be a part of like a debriefing classroom discussion. Or I've also linked here some online tools that you might like to use to allow your students to communicate and collaborate as they're reflecting on their learning. All right, so we are ending right back where we started. So hopefully as we went through, you saw several connections to these 8 mathematical principles that we talked about in the very beginning. Like I mentioned before, it's important that we're thinking real world when we are teaching math to our students so that they understand why this is something that they need to understand, not just inside our walls, but also when they move outside of our walls in the future. Please do not hesitate to reach out to myself. My email starts off with R.E. Gibbs and all of the other Madison City follow-up. Or also to Miss Katie Witt. Either one of us would be very happy to help you out. If there's anything in particular that we talked about in the presentation that you would like to have a little more conversation about, or if you'd like to plan some things together, we are happy to do that with you. So let us know. Thank you for participating in the PD, and thank you so much for all that you do for our students on a day-to-day basis. I encourage you to take some risks, challenge yourself, and try some new things. And let us know when you try out those new strategies, because we love to hear what you guys are doing in the classroom, or come out and visit and see it in action. Bye, guys.